The alarm clock's shrill beeping cut through the pre-dawn darkness of the Martinez household at 6:30 a.m., just as it had every Tuesday for the past 3 months. Sarah Martinez rolled over in her queen-sized bed, her hand instinctively reaching to silence the noise before it could wake her 2-year-old daughter Emma, who slept in the adjoining room. The hardwood floors creaked under her bare feet as she padded to the kitchen. Her morning routine, as predictable as the Texas sunrise that was just beginning to peek through the blinds of their modest 2-bedroom apartment in South Austin. Sarah had been dreading this particular Tuesday for weeks. At 9:30 a.m., she had scheduled an appointment with Dr. Rebecca Morrison, one of Austin's most respected pediatric developmental specialists. The appointment that every mother of a speech-delayed child both desperately needs and fears in equal measure. As a licensed speech therapist herself, working primarily with elderly stroke patients at St. David's Rehabilitation Center, Sarah knew all too well the red flags that had been accumulating around Emma's development like storm clouds on a clear horizon. 26 months old, and Emma had yet to speak a single recognizable word. Not mama or dada or even no, that universal toddler favorite that most children master before their first birthday. Instead, Emma communicated through an elaborate system of pointing, grunting, and increasingly frustrated tantrums that left both mother and daughter exhausted. Sarah had initially attributed the delay to Emma's premature birth. She had arrived 6 weeks early after a complicated pregnancy. That had kept Sarah on bed rest for 2 months. The neonatal intensive care unit at Dell Children's Medical Center had become their second home for the first month of Emma's life, with tubes and monitors creating a technological cocoon around the tiny infant who weighed barely 4 pounds. But as the months passed and Emma's milestones continued to lag behind her peers, Sarah's professional knowledge became both a blessing and a curse. She could identify every missed developmental marker, every concerning behavior pattern, every subtle sign that suggested something more complex than simple delayed speech. Emma's pediatrician, Dr. James Rodriguez, had initially counseled patients. Some children are just observers, he had said during Emma's 18-month checkup. She'll talk when she's ready. But by the 2-year mark, even Dr. Rodriguez had grown concerned enough to refer them to a specialist. The coffee maker gurgled to life as Sarah measured out the dark roast blend that had become her lifeline during these challenging months. Through the kitchen window, she could see the familiar sights of their neighborhood coming to life. Joggers making their way toward Zilker Park, the early shift workers at the nearby food truck preparing for the morning rush, and Mrs. Chun from the apartment next door, walking her elderly corgi, Buster, who moved with the deliberate slowness of his 15 years. Emma's bedroom remained blissfully quiet, and Sarah allowed herself a few precious moments of solitude with her coffee and her thoughts. The morning light streaming through the kitchen window highlighted the collection of picture books stacked on the counter, books that Sarah read to Emma every night, hoping to spark some verbal response. There were the classic children's stories, the educational books about colors and shapes, and even specialized books designed for children with speech delays. Emma would sit attentively during story time, her dark brown eyes following the pictures with obvious interest, but she never attempted to repeat the words or make the sounds that typically developing children would naturally mimic. What worried Sarah most wasn't just the absence of speech, but the way Emma seemed to exist in her own private world. She was affectionate with her mother, seeking hugs and comfort when needed, and she could follow simple instructions and demonstrate understanding of complex concepts. But there was something different about the way she interacted with her environment, a heightened awareness that seemed almost supernatural at times. Emma would often point at things that others couldn't see, or react to sounds that no one else seemed to notice. Last week, she had spent an entire afternoon pointing persistently at the apartment's smoke detector, growing increasingly agitated until Sarah discovered that the battery was indeed running low, though the device hadn't yet begun its warning chirps. The pediatric appointment weighed heavily on Sarah's mind as she finished her coffee and began preparing for the day ahead. She had filled out countless questionnaires about Emma's development, marking no or not yet beside most of the standard milestones. The forms felt like a catalog of her failures as a mother, even though her rational, professional mind knew better. She had read every book, consulted with colleagues, tried every recommended technique, and still Emma remained locked in her silent world. At 7:15, Sarah heard the familiar sounds of Emma waking up, not crying or calling out like most toddlers, but the soft rustling of sheets and the gentle thud of small feet hitting the floor. Emma appeared in the kitchen doorway moments later, her curly brown hair tousled from sleep, wearing her favorite pajamas decorated with cartoon elephants. She walked directly to Sarah and raised her arms in the universal toddler signal for pick me up, and Sarah lifted her daughter into a warm embrace, inhaling the sweet scent of her shampooed hair. "Good morning, beautiful girl," Sarah whispered, as she did every morning, hoping that today might be the day Emma would respond with words instead of her usual contented sigh. But Emma simply nestled against her mother's shoulder, pointing toward the refrigerator where her sippy cup waited on the counter. As Sarah prepared Emma's breakfast, scrambled eggs cut into small pieces, fresh strawberries, and whole grain toast with a thin layer of almond butter, she found herself studying her daughter's face for any sign of impending speech. Emma ate methodically, using her small fingers with surprising dexterity, occasionally pointing to indicate she wanted more strawberries or water. Her comprehension was clearly age-appropriate. She could identify objects, follow multi-step instructions, and even demonstrate a sense of humor by giggling at silly faces or funny sounds. But the words simply wouldn't come. By 8:45, both mother and daughter were dressed and ready for their journey downtown. Emma wore her favorite purple dress with small white flowers, and Sarah had chosen comfortable walking shoes, knowing they would have to navigate several blocks of Austin's increasingly busy downtown area to reach the medical building. The stroller, a sturdy three-wheeled model that had been a gift from Sarah's parents, was loaded with a diaper bag, snacks, and the thick folder of medical records and developmental assessments that Dr. Morrison had requested. As they left the apartment and stepped into the warm Texas morning, Sarah felt a mixture of hope and apprehension settling in her chest. The downtown Austin skyline stretched before them, a blend of historic buildings and modern high-rises that reflected the city's evolution from sleepy college town to thriving metropolitan area. Food trucks were already positioning themselves for the lunch rush, and the familiar sounds of urban life, car horns, construction work, and the distant hum of traffic created a symphony of city activity. Emma seemed more alert than usual. As they made their way through the neighborhood, her head turning to track sounds and movements that caught her attention. She pointed at a red cardinal perched on a stop sign, watched with fascination as a delivery truck maneuvered through a narrow alley, and smiled at a friendly golden retriever being walked by its owner. These moments of engagement gave Sarah hope that whatever challenges lay ahead, Emma was still very much present and aware of the world around her. The walk to downtown would take about 20 minutes, giving them plenty of time to arrive early for the 9:30 appointment. As they approached the bustling plaza area near the medical district, Sarah mentally prepared herself for the conversations ahead. She had practiced explaining Emma's history, describing the concerns that had brought them to this point, and discussing the various possibilities that Dr. Morrison might explore. But nothing could have prepared her for what was about to unfold during what should have been an ordinary Tuesday morning walk through downtown Austin. The morning sun climbed higher over downtown Austin as Sarah pushed Emma's stroller along the tree-lined sidewalks of 4th Street, where the transition from residential to commercial became more pronounced with each block. The familiar sounds of the city's awakening surrounded them, the distant rumble of the Mopac Expressway, the rhythmic hammering from a construction site 3 blocks over, and the melodic chatter of early morning joggers heading toward Lady Bird Lake. Emma sat quietly in her stroller, her small hands resting on the safety bar, her eyes tracking the movement of pigeons pecking at scattered breadcrumbs near the bus stop. As they approached the intersection of 4th and Colorado, Sarah noticed the increased police presence that had become commonplace in downtown Austin over the past year. The city's growth had brought both prosperity and challenges, and the Austin Police Department had responded with more visible community policing efforts. She had grown accustomed to seeing officers on foot patrol, bicycle units weaving through traffic, and the occasional mounted police officer during special events. But it was the K-9 units that always drew the most attention from children and adults alike. Officer David Shunn had been walking his regular Tuesday morning beat for 3 years, ever since his promotion to the K-9 unit. At 34 years old, he was a 12-year veteran of the Austin Police Department, having started as a patrol officer straight out of the police academy after completing his criminal justice degree at the University of Texas. His partner, Rex, was a 4-year-old German Shepherd who had been imported from a specialized breeding program in Czech Republic, specifically selected for police work due to his exceptional intelligence, trainability, and calm temperament around civilians. Rex was impressive by any standard, weighing 85 pounds of lean muscle and standing nearly 26 inches at the shoulder. His coat was the classic German Shepherd coloration of black and tan, with alert ears that seemed to rotate independently as he monitored the urban environment around him. But what set Rex apart from other police dogs was his remarkable ability to read human emotions and his gentle demeanor with children. During community outreach events, Rex would sit patiently while dozens of small hands petted his fur, never showing signs of stress or agitation despite the overwhelming attention. Officer Chun took pride in Rex's reputation throughout the downtown Austin community. Shop owners would wave from their doorways, knowing that the presence of the K-9 unit meant an extra layer of security for their businesses. Regular commuters had grown accustomed to seeing the pair during their morning routines, and Chun had developed friendly relationships with many of the locals who worked in the area. The food truck vendors would often offer Rex a drink of water during hot summer days, and the parking enforcement officers would share information about suspicious activities they had observed during their rounds. On this particular morning, Chun and Rex were completing the final leg of their patrol route before heading back to headquarters for Rex's scheduled training session. They had responded to a minor vandalism report at a coffee shop 2 blocks away. Someone had spray-painted graffiti on the exterior wall during the night and had spent the better part of an hour taking witness statements and filing the incident report. The morning had been routine, with no significant incidents or concerns, and Rex had been his usual alert and professional self throughout their duties. As they rounded the corner from Colorado Street onto 4th, Chun noticed a young woman pushing a stroller in their direction. She appeared to be in her late 20s or early 30s, with shoulder-length dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and wearing the comfortable clothing of someone planning to spend time walking around the city. The child in the stroller was small, clearly a toddler, with curly brown hair and wearing a purple dress with small white flowers. Nothing about the scene seemed unusual or noteworthy, just another mother and child navigating their way through downtown Austin on a Tuesday morning. Rex, however, had noticed something that Chun had not. The German Shepherd's pace had slowed slightly, and his ears were positioned forward in the focused attention stance that Chun had learned to recognize over their 3 years of partnership. Rex's nose was working overtime, processing the countless scents that filled the urban air, but his gaze kept returning to the approaching stroller and its small occupant. Sarah, meanwhile, had spotted the K9 unit from nearly a block away. Emma had always shown interest in dogs, pointing excitedly whenever they encountered pets during their neighborhood walks or visits to the local park. Sarah had often wondered if getting a family dog might help encourage Emma to speak. She had read articles about animal-assisted therapy and its potential benefits for children with developmental delays. But their apartment lease prohibited pets, and Sarah's work schedule as a speech therapist made pet ownership impractical for the time being. As the distance between them closed, Sarah noticed that Emma's behavior was changing in a way she had never observed before. Instead of her usual quiet observation, Emma began shifting in her stroller seat, her small body pressing forward against the safety straps with unusual intensity. Her right arm extended, pointing directly toward the approaching police dog, and her breathing seemed to quicken with what appeared to be excitement or anticipation. Officer Chun had encountered this reaction countless times before. Children were naturally drawn to Rex, and most parents were happy to allow brief interactions. That helped build positive relationships between the community and law enforcement. He began to slow his pace slightly, preparing for the typical exchange that would involve a few minutes of letting the child pet Rex while he spoke briefly with the parent about the K9 program and community safety. Rex, however, was displaying behavior that Chun found puzzling. The dog's tail, which typically wagged gently during encounters with children, remained still and alert. His head was tilted slightly to one side, as if he were listening to something that Chun couldn't hear. The German Shepherd's dark brown eyes were fixed on the small girl in the stroller with an intensity that seemed almost human-like in its focus and concentration. Sarah pulled the stroller to a stop about 10 feet away from the officer and his K9 partner, unsure of the proper protocol for such encounters, but not wanting to interfere with police duties. Emma's pointing had become even more insistent. Her small index finger aimed directly at Rex, and for the first time in months, Sarah heard her daughter making vocalizations that sounded almost like attempts at words, not the usual grunts and babbling, but something more purposeful and urgent. "Good morning," Officer Chun said with the friendly professionalism that had made him popular in the community policing role. "Beautiful morning for a walk. This is Rex, and I'm Officer Chun. Your little one seems interested in meeting my partner here." Sarah smiled, feeling the familiar mixture of hope and apprehension that accompanied any social interaction involving Emma. "Good morning, officer. I'm Sarah Martinez, and this is Emma. She loves dogs, though she doesn't really talk yet. But she definitely seems excited to see Rex." As if responding to the mention of his name, Rex took a step forward, his movement controlled and deliberate. His nose was working constantly, and his eyes remained locked on Emma with that same intense focus. The German Shepherd's body language was unlike anything Chun had observed in their years of partnership. Alert and attentive, but with an undercurrent of something that almost resembled concern or worry. Emma's vocalizations grew stronger, taking on an urgency that made Sarah lean forward in surprise. These weren't the random sounds of a toddler's babbling, but something that seemed to have purpose and direction. Emma's free hand joined her pointing finger, both small arms now extended toward Rex, and her dark brown eyes were wide with what appeared to be distress or alarm rather than simple excitement. The morning air seemed to grow still around them, as if the usual sounds of downtown Austin had momentarily faded into background noise. Other pedestrians continued to pass by on the sidewalk, unaware that something extraordinary was building. In the space between a silent toddler and a highly trained police dog, Officer Chun found himself studying Emma's behavior more carefully, his professional instincts telling him that this encounter was unlike the dozens of similar interactions he and Rex had experienced during their community policing duties. Rex took another step forward, bringing himself within arm's reach of the stroller, his massive head now level with Emma's small form. The German shepherd's breathing had changed, becoming more measured and deliberate, and Chun noticed a subtle shift in his partner's posture that suggested Rex was preparing for something, though what that might be remained unclear. In that moment, suspended between the ordinary routine of a Tuesday morning patrol and something none of them could have anticipated, three lives were about to intersect in a way that would challenge everything they thought they understood about communication, intuition, and the extraordinary connections that can exist between the most unlikely companions. The morning breeze carried the scent of breakfast tacos from a nearby food truck and the faint aroma of coffee from the dozens of cafes that dotted downtown Austin. Traffic hummed along 4th Street in its predictable rhythm, and the construction sounds from the new high-rise development 3 blocks away provided a steady percussion to the urban symphony. But in the small circle of sidewalk where Sarah Martinez, her daughter Emma, Officer David Chun, and his K-9 partner Rex had converged, time seemed to slow to an almost supernatural crawl. Emma's small body trembled with an energy that Sarah had never witnessed in her 26 months of motherhood. The toddler's breathing had become rapid and shallow, her chest rising and falling beneath the purple dress with white flowers that had seemed so cheerful just minutes earlier. Her dark brown eyes, usually soft and observant, now held an intensity it was both startling and deeply unsettling. Both of Emma's small hands were extended toward Rex, her fingers spread wide as if she were trying to physically reach across the 3 feet of space that separated them. Rex, meanwhile, had begun exhibiting behavior that made Officer Chun's professional instincts surge to high alert. The German shepherd's normally confident posture had shifted into something that Chun had only seen during the most serious emergency situations, a combination of high alertness and what appeared to be physical discomfort. Rex's left rear leg, which had been bearing weight normally throughout their morning patrol, now seemed to be favored slightly. The dog's magnificent head was lowered, his dark eyes fixed on Emma with an expression that seemed almost pleading. "Something's wrong," Sarah whispered, as she wasn't entirely certain whether she was referring to her daughter's unprecedented behavior or the palpable tension that had descended upon their impromptu gathering. Her maternal instincts were firing on all cylinders, every protective impulse in her body telling her that Emma was experiencing something far beyond normal toddler excitement about meeting a friendly dog. Officer Chun knelt down beside Rex, his trained hand moving to check his partner's vital signs in the way he had been taught during their initial K-9 training program 3 years earlier. Rex's pulse was elevated, and the dog's breathing had taken on a pattern that Chun recognized as distress, though there were no obvious external signs of injury or illness. The German shepherd had passed his monthly veterinary examination just 2 weeks prior with flying colors, showing no indication of health problems or physical limitations. Emma's vocalizations intensified, moving from the urgent babbling that had initially caught their attention to something that sounded increasingly like actual words trying to form themselves. Her small mouth opened and closed with deliberate effort, her tongue working against her teeth and lips in combinations that Sarah recognized from her professional training as legitimate attempts at speech production. But the sounds that emerged were unlike anything Emma had ever produced before, clear, purposeful syllables that seemed to carry meaning far beyond their simple acoustic properties. Dot 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 dot. Emma's voice cut through the morning air with crystalline clarity, the first recognizable word she had ever spoken landing like a thunderbolt in the space between them. Sarah's hands flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears as she witnessed her daughter's first verbal breakthrough. But Emma wasn't finished. Her small voice grew stronger, more confident, as if the dam that had held back her words for more than 2 years had suddenly burst open. "Doggy hurt," Emma said, her pronunciation precise despite her age and previous silence. The words were spoken with a certainty and clarity that seemed impossible, coming from a child who had never before demonstrated verbal language skills. Doggy hurt inside. Doggy sick. Officer Chun's blood ran cold as he processed what he had just heard. Rex whimpered softly, a sound that the German shepherd rarely made except during moments of genuine distress. The dog's left rear leg was now clearly favored, and Chun could see subtle signs of discomfort in his partner's posture that he had somehow missed during their morning patrol. How was it possible that a nonverbal toddler had identified something wrong with his highly trained police dog that he, with 3 years of daily partnership, had failed to notice? Sarah fumbled with the stroller's brake system, her hands shaking as she tried to process what she was witnessing. Emma continued speaking, her vocabulary expanding with each passing moment in a way that defied every principle of language development that Sarah had learned during her graduate studies in speech-language pathology. The words weren't random or nonsensical. They were specific, targeted, and delivered with an emotional intensity that suggested Emma understood exactly what she was communicating. "Hip bone broken inside," Emma said, her small finger now pointing specifically toward Rex's left rear quarter. "Doggy walking hurt, but trying to hide. Doggy scared to tell policemen because wants to be good dog." The accuracy of Emma's assessment sent chills down Officer Chun's spine. Rex had indeed been trained never to show weakness or discomfort while on duty. It was part of the intense conditioning that made police dogs effective in dangerous situations. But Chung was beginning to realize that Rex's stoic behavior might have been masking genuine physical pain. The German shepherd's training would have compelled him to continue working despite discomfort, just as Emma had somehow intuited. Emma's verbal flow continued unabated, as if 26 months of stored communication were pouring out in a torrent of unprecedented clarity. "Doggy needs doctor now. Pain getting bigger inside. Bone pieces moving wrong way. Doggy trying so hard to be brave." Sarah knelt down beside the stroller, her face level with her daughter's for the first time during this extraordinary outburst. Emma's eyes met her mother's, and for a moment, Sarah saw something in her daughter's expression that transcended the typical parent-child connection. Emma's gaze held a depth of understanding and empathy that seemed far beyond her chronological age, as if she were channeling some form of intuitive knowledge that existed outside the normal parameters of human development. "How do you know this, sweetheart?" Sarah asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "How can you tell that Rex is hurting?" Emma's response came without hesitation, delivered in the matter-of-fact tone that toddlers often used when explaining something they considered obvious. "Doggy's inside voice is crying. His bone pieces are sharp and moving wrong. He's trying not to let the crying show on his outside, but his inside voice is very loud." Officer Chun had reached for his radio, his professional training overriding his amazement at what he was witnessing. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. I need to request an emergency veterinary consultation for my canine partner. Possible injury that requires immediate attention." The dispatcher's voice crackled through the radio with routine efficiency. "Unit 47, what type of injury are you reporting? Is your canine showing visible signs of distress?" Chun looked down at Rex, who was still maintaining his professional posture, despite the subtle signs that Emma had somehow detected. "Negative on visible distress, but I have reason to believe there may be internal injury to the left rear hip area. Requesting immediate transport to the department veterinary facility." As he spoke into the radio, Shin couldn't help but glance at Emma, who was watching the interaction with intense focus. Her unprecedented verbal outburst seemed to have stabilized into a more sustainable pattern of communication, though she remained far more articulate than any 2-year-old he had ever encountered. The transformation was so complete and sudden that it felt almost supernatural, challenging every assumption he had about child development and the limitations of human intuition. Emma reached out her small hand toward Rex, stopping just short of actually touching the German Shepherd's fur. "It's okay, doggy," she said with gentle reassurance. "The doctor will fix your broken pieces. You've been such a good, brave dog, and now it's time to let the grown-ups help you feel better." Rex's tail moved slightly, not a full wag, but a subtle acknowledgement that seemed to suggest he understood and appreciated Emma's words. The connection between the silent toddler and the highly trained police dog had transcended the normal boundaries of interspecies communication, creating a moment of pure understanding that none of the adults present could fully comprehend. Within minutes, the routine Tuesday morning encounter had transformed into an emergency situation that would challenge everything the three adults thought they knew about communication, intuition, and the extraordinary capabilities that could emerge from the most unexpected sources. As they waited for the veterinary transport to arrive, Emma continued to speak softly to Rex, her words carrying a healing quality that seemed to provide comfort to the injured dog and profound amazement to the humans who were witnessing this impossible breakthrough. The Austin Police Department's veterinary facility occupied a modern single-story building on the eastern edge of the department's headquarters complex, a testament to the city's commitment to the health and welfare of its four-legged officers. Dr. Jennifer Walsh had served as the department's chief veterinarian for 8 years, overseeing the medical care of 37 police dogs, 12 mounted patrol horses, and the occasional specialized animals used in detective work. Her clinic was equipped with state-of-the-art diagnostic equipment, including digital X-ray machines, ultrasound capabilities, and a full surgical suite that rivaled many private veterinary practices in the Austin metropolitan area. At 10:47 a.m., Dr. Walsh received the call that would challenge her 15 years of veterinary experience in ways she never could have anticipated. Officer Chun's radio transmission had been relayed through dispatch with the unusual notation that the suspected injury had been identified by a civilian child with no apparent veterinary training. The dispatcher's voice had carried a hint of skepticism as she relayed the information, but Dr. Walsh had learned long ago that police dogs often concealed injuries and illnesses with stoic determination that could fool even experienced handlers. Rex arrived at the veterinary facility in the back of a specialized canine transport vehicle, accompanied by Officer Chun and, unexpectedly, Sarah Martinez and her daughter Emma. The decision to bring the Martinez family had been Chun's, made in the parking lot of downtown Austin as they waited for transport. Something about Emma's extraordinary diagnosis had convinced him that her presence might provide additional insights that could help Rex's treatment. Sarah had initially protested, concerned about missing Emma's appointment with Dr. Morrison, but the pediatric specialist had been understanding when Sarah called to explain the extraordinary circumstances that had led to their delay. Dr. Walsh's first impression of Rex showed a dog in apparent good health, walking normally and displaying the alert, professional demeanor that characterized well-trained police dogs. His vital signs were within normal ranges, his coat was healthy and well-maintained, and his behavior showed no obvious signs of distress or discomfort. If not for the specific nature of the suspected injury location that Officer Chun had described, Dr. Walsh might have been tempted to dismiss the concern as overcaution. Emma, meanwhile, had returned to her typical nonverbal state during the transport to the veterinary facility. She sat quietly in her stroller, observing the unfamiliar environment with her usual wide-eyed attention, but showing no signs of the remarkable verbal abilities she had demonstrated just an hour earlier. Sarah found herself wondering if she had somehow imagined the entire incident, if stress and wishful thinking had created false memories of her daughter's unprecedented speech. "Let's take a look at this fellow," Dr. Walsh said, her professional manner immediately putting both Rex and Officer Chun at ease. She began with a standard physical examination, her experienced hands palpating Rex's legs, checking his range of motion, and observing his gait as he walked across the examination room floor. Rex cooperated fully, his training allowing him to remain calm and still during the examination process. The initial physical examination revealed nothing unusual. Rex's left rear leg showed normal range of motion, bore weight appropriately, and showed no signs of swelling, heat, or tenderness that would typically indicate injury or inflammation. Dr. Walsh found herself puzzled by the specificity of the SUSPEDED injury location that Officer Chun had described, particularly given the lack of supporting physical evidence. "Officer Chun," Dr. Walsh said, pausing in her examination, "I'm not finding any obvious signs of injury or discomfort in Rex's left rear leg or hip area. His range of motion is normal, he's bearing weight evenly, and there's no indication of pain response when I manipulate the joint. What specifically made you suspect an injury in this location?" Chun glanced toward Emma, who was watching the proceedings with intense focus despite her continued silence. "Doctor, this is going to sound unusual, but the suspected injury was identified by this young lady here. She's 2 years old, and this morning she spoke for the first time in her life to tell us that Rex had a broken bone in his hip." Dr. Walsh raised an eyebrow, her scientific training immediately raising questions about the reliability of such a diagnosis. However, her experience with police work had taught her that unusual sources of information sometimes proved accurate, in ways that conventional wisdom couldn't explain. "Well, given the specificity of the concern and Rex's value to the department, I think we should proceed with diagnostic imaging. Sometimes injuries that aren't apparent during physical examination show up clearly on X-rays." The digital X-ray machine hung to life as Dr. Walsh positioned Rex for lateral and anterior-posterior views of his left hip and rear leg. Rex, trained for various medical procedures through his police work, remained remarkably still during the imaging process, requiring minimal restraint or sedation. The high-resolution images would be available for viewing within minutes, displayed on the large monitor mounted on the examination room wall. Emma's demeanor changed subtly as the X-ray machine operated, her attention becoming more focused and her breathing taking on the same rapid, shallow pattern that Sarah had observed during the morning's extraordinary encounter. Although she remained silent, Emma's small hands gripped the sides of her stroller with unusual intensity, and her eyes never left Rex's position on the examination table. Dr. Walsh moved to the computer workstation, where the digital images were beginning to appear on the screen. The first X-ray showed Rex's left rear leg from the knee down, revealing normal bone structure and joint alignment. But as the second image loaded, the view that included the hip joint and upper femur, Dr. Walsh's expression changed from professional curiosity to genuine amazement. "I'll be damned," she whispered, leaning closer to the monitor to examine the image more carefully. There, clearly visible in the high-resolution digital X-ray, was a hairline fracture running through the neck of Rex's left femur, just below the hip joint. The fracture was so fine that it would have been virtually impossible to detect without imaging, and the location was such that Rex would have experienced significant pain while still being able to maintain normal mobility through sheer determination. And training. Officer Chun stepped closer to the monitor, his eyes widening as he processed what the X-ray revealed. "How is that possible? He's been working normally all week. I haven't seen any signs of discomfort or behavioral changes." Dr. Walsh pointed to the fracture line on the screen, her finger tracing the nearly invisible crack in the bone. "This type of stress fracture can develop gradually over time, particularly in working dogs who engage in high-impact activities. Rex's training would have conditioned him to work through discomfort, and the fracture's location means he could still bear weight and move normally while experiencing significant pain. If left untreated, this could have progressed to a complete break that would have required major surgical intervention. Sarah felt her knees grow weak as the implications of Emma's diagnosis became clear. Her 2-year-old daughter, who had never spoken a word in her life, had somehow identified a serious medical condition in a police dog that had fooled both the dog's experienced handler and an initial veterinary examination. The accuracy of Emma's assessment was beyond coincidental. It suggested some form of intuitive ability that challenged every assumption Sarah had about her daughter's capabilities. "How did she know?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. How could a 2-year-old child possibly identify something that specific and accurate? Dr. Walsh turned from the monitor to look at Emma, who was now watching the adults with an expression that seemed far more mature and understanding than her chronological age would suggest. "I've been a veterinarian for 15 years, and I've seen some remarkable examples of interspecies communication and intuition. Some animals seem to possess diagnostic abilities that we don't fully understand, but I've never encountered anything like this from a human child." Emma chose that moment to speak again, her voice clear and purposeful despite her previous hour of silence. Doggie's bone was crying very loud inside. The crying was getting louder every day, but Doggie was trying to be brave for his policeman friend. Now the doctor can make the crying stop. The room fell silent, except for the gentle hum of the veterinary equipment and the distant sounds of activity from the main police headquarters building. Dr. Walsh stared at Emma with a mixture of professional fascination and personal amazement, while Officer Chun found himself reevaluating everything he thought he knew about his partnership with Rex. Rex, meanwhile, seemed to sense that his condition had been discovered and acknowledged. For the first time since arriving at the veterinary facility, the German Shepherd allowed himself to show subtle signs of discomfort, shifting his weight slightly and lowering his head in a gesture that seemed almost like relief at no longer having to hide his pain. The emergency response that had begun with the toddler's unprecedented words on a downtown Austin sidewalk had revealed not only a serious medical condition, but also capabilities in Emma that defied conventional understanding. As Dr. Walsh began planning Rex's treatment protocol, the 3 adults found themselves grappling with questions that extended far beyond veterinary medicine into the realm of human potential, and the mysterious connections that could exist between the most unlikely companions. Dr. Jennifer Walsh had intended to keep the remarkable circumstances surrounding Rex's diagnosis confidential, understanding the sensitive nature of what had transpired at her veterinary facility. However, the extraordinary accuracy of Emma's assessment had prompted her to reach out to colleagues within the Austin medical community, seeking professional opinions about the neurological and psychological implications of a 2-year-old, demonstrating such sophisticated diagnostic abilities. What began as discreet professional consultations quickly evolved into something far more complex and public than anyone had anticipated. Dr. Amanda Foster, the pediatric neurologist at Dell Children's Medical Center, whom Dr. Walsh had contacted, found herself captivated by the case from both scientific and clinical perspectives. At 42 years old, Dr. Foster had spent nearly 2 decades studying unusual neurological presentations in children, including cases of savant syndrome, early-onset synesthesia, and rare forms of heightened sensory processing. However, Emma's apparent ability to diagnose medical conditions in animals represented something entirely outside her extensive experience with pediatric neurology. The first breach of confidentiality occurred inadvertently during a staff meeting at Dell Children's Medical Center on Wednesday afternoon. Dr. Foster had presented Emma's case as an anonymous example during a discussion about atypical neurological development, intending to gather input from her colleagues about potential diagnostic approaches. However, one of the attending physicians in the meeting, Dr. Marcus Webb, happened to be married to a reporter for the Austin American-Statesman, and fragments of the case details made their way into casual dinner conversation that evening. By Thursday morning, investigative reporter Linda Chun, no relation to Officer Chun, had begun making phone calls to verify the unusual story her husband had mentioned. Linda had built her career on uncovering human interest stories that revealed extraordinary aspects of ordinary people's lives, and the possibility of a toddler with diagnostic abilities immediately captured her professional attention. Through a combination of persistent inquiry and fortunate timing, she managed to connect the anonymous medical case with Officer Chun's unusual veterinary emergency report filed 2 days earlier. Sarah Martinez first became aware of the media interest when her phone rang at 7:30 a.m. on Thursday with a call from a producer at KVUE News, Austin's ABC affiliate. The producer, Janet Morrison, had received a tip about a local toddler with miraculous medical abilities and was hoping to arrange an interview. Sarah's initial reaction was one of protective alarm. She had no desire to expose Emma to public scrutiny, particularly given her daughter's complex developmental needs and the family's ongoing concerns about her speech delays. "I appreciate your interest," Sarah told the producer, "but my daughter is only 2 years old, and we're still trying to understand what happened ourselves. This isn't something we're prepared to discuss publicly." However, Janet Morrison was both persistent and persuasive, explaining that the story had the potential to raise awareness about unusual neurological gifts in children and might connect the Martinez family with researchers who could help Emma develop her apparent abilities. More concerning for Sarah was Morrison's casual mention that she had already spoken with sources at the police department and the veterinary clinic, suggesting that the story was going to be reported with or without the family's cooperation. By Thursday afternoon, Sarah found herself fielding calls from 3 local television stations, 2 radio programs, and a freelance journalist who claimed to be working on a story for Texas Monthly magazine. Each caller expressed fascination with Emma's diagnostic abilities and requested interviews, photo sessions, or opportunities to observe Emma interacting with animals. The attention was overwhelming and unwanted, particularly since Emma had returned to her typical nonverbal state and showed no signs of the remarkable abilities that had captured everyone's interest. Officer Chun was experiencing his own version of media pressure from within the Austin Police Department. Word of Rex's unusual diagnosis had spread through the canine unit and beyond, creating a mixture of curiosity, skepticism, and professional interest among his colleagues. Some officers were genuinely intrigued by the possibility that civilians might possess diagnostic abilities that could assist in police work, while others dismissed the entire incident as coincidental or exaggerated. Captain Robert Torres, who supervised the K-9 unit, called Chun into his office Thursday afternoon to discuss the growing attention surrounding the case. "David, I need to understand exactly what happened out there on Tuesday morning," Torres said, his tone indicating both professional concern and personal curiosity. "The media is calling. We've got veterinarians asking questions. And now I have people from the university wanting to study our dogs. What exactly did this little girl do?" Chun found himself in the awkward position of defending an experience that he himself still struggled to understand. "Captain, I know how it sounds, but she diagnosed Rex's injury with accuracy that would have impressed a veterinary specialist. The kid had never spoken before in her life, and she pinpointed a fracture that I had completely missed, despite working with Rex every day for 3 years." Meanwhile, the academic community was beginning to take notice of Emma's case through the network of professional relationships that connected Austin's medical and research institutions. Dr. Patricia Hernandez, who directed the Animal Cognition Research Program at the University of Texas, received a phone call from Dr. Foster requesting consultation about potential mechanisms that might explain Emma's apparent abilities. Dr. Hernandez had spent her career studying the ways that humans and animals communicated across species barriers, and she was particularly interested in cases where individuals demonstrated unusual sensitivity to animal behavior and health. Her laboratory had documented instances of dogs detecting seizures before they occurred, cats identifying cancer in their owners, and horses responding to human emotional states with remarkable accuracy. However, Emma's case represented a reversal of the typical pattern. Instead of an animal detecting human medical conditions, a human child had apparently diagnosed an animal's hidden injury. The neurological mechanisms that might explain this kind of ability are largely theoretical. Dr. Hernandez explained during her consultation with Dr. Foster. We know that some individuals possess heightened sensitivity to subtle behavioral cues, pheromones, or other sensory information that most people process unconsciously. But a 2-year-old demonstrating this level of diagnostic accuracy suggests something far more sophisticated than typical sensory processing. By Friday morning, the story had gained enough momentum that Linda Chun's article appeared on the front page of the Austin American-Statesman's local section, accompanied by a photograph of Rex during a routine police patrol. Emma and Sarah had declined to be photographed. The headline read, "Local Toddler's First Words, Diagnose Police Dog's Hidden Injury," and the article provided a detailed account of the Tuesday morning encounter that had launched the extraordinary sequence of events. The newspaper article served as a catalyst for broader media attention, with the story being picked up by regional news outlets and shared on social media platforms throughout Texas and beyond. Sarah's phone began ringing with calls from as far away as Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio, as producers and journalists sought to schedule interviews or arrange visits to Austin to meet the family. More concerning for Sarah were the calls from individuals claiming to have similar experiences or offering various forms of assistance. Some callers were parents of children with developmental delays who hoped that Emma's story might provide insights for their own families. Others were self-proclaimed psychics, animal communicators, or alternative medicine practitioners who wanted to study Emma's abilities or offer their services to help develop her gifts. Dr. Foster, meanwhile, had begun the process of designing a comprehensive neurological evaluation for Emma, working with colleagues at Dell Children's Medical Center to develop protocols that could assess her cognitive abilities, sensory processing, and potential neurological differences without overwhelming a 2-year-old child. The challenge was creating assessments that could provide meaningful scientific data while respecting Emma's age, developmental needs, and her family's privacy concerns. We're dealing with something that exists at the intersection of neurology, psychology, veterinary medicine, and possibly areas of science that we don't yet fully understand, Dr. Foster explained to Sarah during a phone consultation Friday afternoon. Emma's abilities could provide insights that benefit not only her own development, but our understanding of human neurological potential more broadly. As the week progressed, the Martinez family found themselves at the center of a growing storm of attention that they had never sought and were not prepared to handle. Emma continued to show no signs of the remarkable verbal abilities that had launched the media interest, remaining largely nonverbal and focused on her typical toddler activities. The disconnect between the public fascination with her apparent gifts and her day-to-day reality as a developmentally delayed 2-year-old created additional stress for Sarah, who was trying to balance her daughter's needs with the growing pressure for public appearances and scientific studies. The extraordinary Tuesday morning encounter that had begun with a routine walk to a medical appointment had evolved into a complex web of medical, scientific, and media attention that would forever change the trajectory of the Martinez families life, challenging them to navigate questions about privacy, exploitation, and the responsible development of Emma's apparent gifts in a world eager to understand and potentially capitalize on her extraordinary abilities. The Dell Children's Medical Center's Pediatric Neurology Department occupied an entire floor of the hospital's East Wing, its corridors lined with colorful murals designed to create a welcoming environment for young patients and their families. Dr. Amanda Foster had spent considerable time preparing for Emma Martinez's comprehensive evaluation, coordinating with specialists across multiple disciplines to develop an assessment protocol that could provide meaningful scientific data while remaining appropriate for a 2-year-old child. The evaluation schedule, carefully planned over 2 weeks to avoid overwhelming Emma, included neurological imaging, cognitive assessments, sensory processing evaluations, and observational studies of her interactions with various animals. Dr. Foster had collaborated with colleagues from the University of Texas Psychology Department, animal behavior specialists, and even researchers from the Texas A&M Veterinary School to create what would become one of the most comprehensive studies of childhood neurological anomalies ever conducted in the Austin medical community. Sarah Martinez arrived at Dell Children's on Monday morning for Emma's first appointment with a mixture of hope and trepidation that had become familiar over the past 2 weeks. The media attention had continued to intensify, with interview requests arriving daily from national news programs, documentary filmmakers, and researchers from universities across the country. Sarah had made the difficult decision to decline most of these requests while allowing the medical evaluation to proceed, hoping that scientific understanding might provide insights that could benefit Emma's development. Emma herself seemed largely unaffected by the attention surrounding her apparent abilities. She continued to display the same developmental patterns that had concerned Sarah for months: minimal verbal communication, intense focus on specific sensory inputs, and periods of what appeared to be detached observation of her environment. The extraordinary verbal outburst that had diagnosed Rex's injury remained an isolated incident, leading some skeptics to question whether the entire event had been misinterpreted or exaggerated. Dr. Foster began the evaluation with a detailed medical history, reviewing Emma's birth records, early development milestones, and the circumstances surrounding her premature birth. The fact that Emma had spent her first month in the neonatal intensive care unit raised questions about potential neurological differences that might have resulted from her early medical challenges, though her subsequent development had shown no signs of the typical complications associated with premature birth. The initial neurological examination revealed subtle differences in Emma's sensory processing that intrigued Dr. Foster and her team. Emma's responses to various stimuli, lights, sounds, textures, and movements showed patterns that suggested heightened sensitivity in some areas and diminished response in others. Her visual tracking abilities were remarkably advanced for her age, and her auditory processing seemed to extend beyond the normal range of human hearing, picking up sounds that the adults in the room couldn't detect. Emma appears to process sensory information in ways that differ significantly from typical childhood development, Dr. Foster explained to Sarah during a consultation following the first day of testing. Her brain seems to be filtering and analyzing environmental data with unusual sophistication, particularly information related to emotional states and physical well-being in living creatures around her. The brain imaging studies, conducted using child-friendly MRI protocols that allowed Emma to watch cartoons during the scanning process, revealed structural differences that fascinated the research team. Emma's temporal lobes, areas of the brain associated with sensory processing and emotional recognition, showed development patterns that were distinctly different from age-matched controls. Additionally, her limbic system, which processes emotions and instinctive behaviors, displayed connectivity patterns that suggested enhanced integration between emotional processing and sensory analysis. While the medical evaluations proceeded, Sarah found herself struggling with decisions that she had never anticipated facing as a mother. Research institutions from Harvard, Stanford, and Johns Hopkins had extended invitations for Emma to participate in longitudinal studies that could provide unprecedented insights into her neurological development. Pharmaceutical companies had inquired about potential therapeutic applications of Emma's abilities. Film producers had offered substantial financial compensation for documentary rights to the family's story. The financial pressures were particularly acute for Sarah, who had been forced to take extended leave from her position at St. David's Rehabilitation Center to manage Emma's medical appointments and the constant stream of interview requests. Her savings were dwindling, and the costs associated with Emma's comprehensive evaluation were mounting, despite the research protocols that covered many of the expenses. The offers from media companies represented financial security that could transform their lives, but Sarah remained deeply uncomfortable with the idea of exploiting her daughter's apparent gifts for commercial purposes. Dr. Patricia Hernandez from the University of Texas had joined the evaluation team to assess Emma's interactions with various animals under controlled conditions. The Animal Cognition Laboratory had developed protocols that could measure physiological responses in both Emma and the animals she encountered, using heart rate monitors, stress hormone measurements, and behavioral analysis to document any unusual patterns of interspecies communication. The initial animal interaction studies produced results that confirmed some aspects of Emma's apparent abilities while raising new questions about their mechanisms and limitations. When presented with healthy animals, Emma showed typical toddler responses: curiosity, gentle touching, and playful interaction. However, when introduced to animals with various health conditions, her behavior changed dramatically, displaying the same intense focus and agitation that Sarah had observed during the encounter with Rex. During one particularly significant session, Emma was introduced to a therapy rabbit named Jasper, who was being treated for a subtle heart condition that had been diagnosed only through specialized veterinary cardiology. Emma's reaction was immediate and intense. She pointed at the rabbit, while verbalizing concerns about heart beating wrong and scared inside feelings. The accuracy of her assessment, confirmed through veterinary records that the research team had not previously reviewed, provided additional evidence that Emma's abilities were genuine rather than coincidental. However, the emotional toll of these interactions on Emma was becoming increasingly apparent to Sarah and the research team. Each encounter with an ill or injured animal left Emma visibly distressed, often resulting in crying episodes that could last for hours. Her sleep patterns became disrupted, and she began showing signs of anxiety that concerned both her mother and the medical professionals overseeing her care. Emma seems to be experiencing the physical and emotional distress of the animals she encounters, Dr. Hernandez explained during a team consultation. Her neurological configuration may be allowing her to process pain and illness signals from other creatures as if they were her own symptoms. This level of empathetic connection, while remarkable from a scientific perspective, could be extremely challenging for a young child to manage emotionally. The research findings were creating ethical dilemmas that extended beyond typical medical practice. Emma's abilities appeared to be real and scientifically verifiable, but the emotional cost of exercising those abilities was significant. The question of whether her gifts should be developed and utilized, or protected and limited, became a source of ongoing debate among the specialists involved in her care. Meanwhile, Sarah was receiving pressure from multiple directions about Emma's future. Animal welfare organizations had reached out about potential applications of Emma's abilities in veterinary diagnostics. Law enforcement agencies had expressed interest in training programs that might help officers develop similar skills for working with canine units. Alternative medicine practitioners had proposed collaborative research into the therapeutic applications of empathetic diagnosis. The most challenging pressure came from other parents of children with developmental delays who had contacted Sarah seeking hope for their own families. These conversations were heartbreaking for Sarah, who understood the desperation that drove parents to seek any possibility of breakthrough for their struggling children. However, Emma's abilities appeared to be unique rather than representative of a broader category of delayed development, making her case unlikely to provide generalizable insights for other families. As the comprehensive evaluation entered its third week, Sarah found herself facing decisions that would shape not only Emma's future, but potentially contribute to scientific understanding of human neurological potential. The preliminary findings suggested that Emma possessed genuine abilities that defied conventional understanding of childhood development. But the personal cost of those abilities was becoming increasingly apparent to everyone involved in her care. The weight of these decisions was compounded by Emma's continued developmental challenges in other areas. Despite her remarkable diagnostic abilities, she remained significantly delayed in typical speech development, social interaction, and age-appropriate play behaviors. The contrast between her extraordinary gifts and her ongoing struggles created a complex portrait of a child whose neurological differences brought both remarkable capabilities and significant challenges that would require careful management throughout her development. Rex's recovery from his hip surgery had progressed remarkably well over the 6 weeks following his diagnosis, thanks in large part to the early detection that had prevented the hairline fracture from becoming a complete break. Dr. Jennifer Walsh's surgical intervention had involved inserting a small titanium pin to stabilize the fracture site, followed by a carefully managed rehabilitation program that would allow Rex to return to active duty within 3 months. Throughout his recovery period, Officer David Shun had maintained regular contact with the Martinez family, recognizing that the extraordinary bond between Emma and his canine partner represented something that extended far beyond their initial chance encounter. Shun's first visit to the Martinez household had been intended as a simple courtesy call to update Sarah on Rex's progress and express gratitude for Emma's life-changing diagnosis. However, what he discovered during that initial visit fundamentally altered his understanding of both Emma's abilities and their potential applications. Emma's reaction to seeing Rex again was immediate and profound. She began speaking in the clear, purposeful manner that had characterized her diagnostic breakthrough, but this time, her words carried comfort and encouragement rather than medical urgency. "Doggie's bone pieces are healing good," Emma had said, her small hand gently touching Rex's fur as the German Shepherd lay calmly beside her on the living room floor. "The metal helper inside is making everything strong again. Doggie feels much better now, but still being careful with the walking." Chun watched in amazement as Rex responded to Emma's words with behavior he had never observed before. The highly trained police dog, typically alert and professional, even during off-duty interactions, seemed to relax completely in Emma's presence. Rex's breathing became slower and more rhythmic, his muscles visibly releasing tension, and his eyes took on a peaceful expression that suggested genuine comfort and understanding. Dr. Foster, who had been documenting Emma's interactions as part of her ongoing research, noted that Emma's verbal abilities seemed directly correlated with her emotional connection to animals in various states of health and recovery. When animals were healthy in content, Emma's speech remained limited to simple observations and expressions of affection. However, when animals were experiencing physical or emotional distress, her verbal abilities expanded dramatically, accompanied by the heightened empathy that allowed her to identify and articulate their conditions. The discovery that Emma's abilities extended beyond diagnosis to what appeared to be therapeutic communication prompted Dr. Foster to expand her research protocols. Working with Dr. Hernandez and colleagues from the veterinary school, they designed studies to measure the physiological effects of Emma's interactions on animals in various stages of illness and recovery. The preliminary results were encouraging. Animals that spent time with Emma during their treatment showed measurably lower stress hormone levels, improved appetite, and accelerated healing compared to control groups. Sarah's decision to limit media exposure while focusing on understanding Emma's abilities had proven to be prescient, as the research revealed the complexity and potential therapeutic value of her daughter's gifts. Rather than pursuing the financial opportunities offered by documentary filmmakers and media companies, Sarah chose to work with Dr. Foster to establish a controlled environment where Emma's abilities could be studied and potentially developed in ways that benefited both Emma and the animals she could help. The Austin Animal Shelter, located on Lamar Boulevard just south of downtown, became an unexpected partner in this research when Director Maria Santos learned about Emma's abilities. Through Dr. Walsh's veterinary network, the shelter, which housed an average of 200 animals at any given time, faced constant challenges in identifying health issues in rescued animals whose medical histories were often unknown or incomplete. Many animals arrived at the shelter after experiencing trauma, neglect, or abandonment, making accurate health assessments crucial for their successful treatment and adoption. Maria Santos approached Sarah with a carefully considered proposal that could benefit both Emma's development and the shelter's mission. Rather than the overwhelming media attention that had characterized the initial weeks following Emma's diagnosis of Rex, the shelter visits would be private, controlled interactions designed to minimize stress on both Emma and the animals while providing valuable diagnostic insights that could improve veterinary care. Emma's first visit to the Austin Animal Shelter took place on a quiet Tuesday morning, exactly 2 months after her initial encounter with Rex. Sarah, Dr. Foster, and Chun, who had requested personal time to observe the session, accompanied Emma as she was introduced to a carefully selected group of animals whose health status was known to the veterinary staff, but not disclosed to the research team. Shelter's clinical coordinator, Dr. Michael Rodriguez, had prepared a protocol that would allow Emma to interact with animals while veterinary staff monitored both the responses and the animal's behavior. The session began with healthy animals: a young golden retriever puppy, an adult tabby cat, and a gentle elderly horse that the shelter used for therapeutic riding programs. Emma's interactions with these animals were typical for a 2-year-old: curious, gentle, and accompanied by simple words of affection. However, when Emma was introduced to a recently rescued beagle named Charlie, her demeanor changed dramatically. Charlie appeared healthy to casual observation, having been surrendered by a family that could no longer provide care due to financial hardship. The veterinary intake examination had noted no obvious health concerns, and Charlie was scheduled for routine vaccination and neutering before being placed for adoption. Emma's reaction to Charlie was immediate and intense. Her small hands began trembling as she pointed toward the beagle, and her voice took on the urgent, articulate quality that had characterized her diagnosis of Rex. Dog has growing bumps inside belly. Bad bumps that make sick feelings. Dog tries to hide the hurt because wants to be good for new people. Dr. Rodriguez, who had been observing from across the room, immediately called for a comprehensive medical examination of Charlie. The ultrasound and blood work revealed exactly what Emma had described: early-stage lymphoma that had not yet produced external symptoms, but was already affecting Charlie's internal organs. The early detection meant that Charlie could begin treatment immediately, significantly improving his prognosis and chances for successful adoption by a family equipped to manage his medical needs. The session with Charlie demonstrated not only Emma's diagnostic abilities, but also her capacity to provide emotional comfort to animals in distress. As the veterinary team prepared Charlie for transport to the specialized oncology clinic, Emma sat quietly beside the beagle, her small hand resting gently on his fur, while she spoke words of reassurance that seemed to calm both the animal and the adults observing the interaction. "Dog will get medicine to fight the bad bumps," Emma said softly. Doctors will help make the sick feelings go away. Dog is brave and strong, and will find a family who loves dogs with medicine needs. Over the following weeks, Emma's visits to the Austin Animal Shelter became a regular part of her routine, carefully scheduled to provide maximum benefit while protecting her emotional well-being. Dr. Foster and her team documented dozens of cases where Emma's insights led to early detection of health issues that might otherwise have gone unnoticed until they became critical. Her abilities proved particularly valuable for identifying stress-related conditions, pain management needs, and behavioral issues that required specialized intervention. The therapeutic aspect of Emma's interactions became increasingly apparent, as shelter staff noted improvements in the emotional well-being of animals that spent time with her. Dogs with separation anxiety showed reduced stress behaviors after Emma's visits. Cats with social trauma began engaging more positively with potential adopters. Even the shelter's more challenging cases, animals with histories of abuse or severe neglect, seemed to respond to Emma's presence with increased trust and emotional stability. Chun's observations during these shelter visits led him to propose a collaboration between the Austin Police Department's Canine Unit and Emma's therapeutic work. Police dogs, despite their extensive training and professional care, occasionally developed stress-related conditions, minor injuries, or behavioral issues that could benefit from Emma's unique form of assessment and comfort. The department's administration, initially skeptical about involving a civilian child in law enforcement activities, became supportive after witnessing the measurable improvements in Rex's recovery and overall well-being. Sarah found that the shelter work provided a sustainable framework for nurturing Emma's abilities while maintaining appropriate boundaries around their family's privacy and Emma's developmental needs. Unlike the chaotic media attention that had characterized the initial weeks following Rex's diagnosis, the shelter visits allowed Emma to use her gifts in a controlled environment that prioritized the well-being of both the animals and Emma herself. The regular interaction with animals in various states of health and recovery also seemed to support Emma's overall development in unexpected ways. Her general vocabulary began expanding beyond the medical observations that had initially characterized her speech. She started using words to express her own needs and emotions, engage in simple conversations with her mother, and demonstrate age-appropriate social interactions with the shelter staff who had become part of her extended community. As autumn approached, the Martinez family had found a rhythm that balanced Emma's extraordinary abilities with the normal developmental needs of a growing toddler, creating a foundation for sustainable growth that honored both her remarkable gifts and her fundamental humanity. 6 months after Emma Martinez had first pointed at a police dog and spoken her first words, the landscape of her life had transformed in ways that no one could have predicted on that ordinary Tuesday morning in downtown Austin. The toddler who had shocked everyone with her precise diagnosis of Rex's hidden injury had become the centerpiece of a unique collaboration between veterinary medicine, pediatric neurology, and animal-assisted therapy that was attracting attention from research institutions across the country. The Emma Martinez Foundation for Animal-Assisted Therapy had been established in partnership with Dell Children's Medical Center, a University of Texas veterinary school, and the Austin Animal Shelter, creating a formal structure for studying and applying Emma's remarkable abilities. Sarah had made the difficult decision to leave her position at St. David's Rehabilitation Center to focus full-time on managing Emma's care and the Foundation's activities, a transition that had been made financially possible through research, grants, and private donations from individuals inspired by Emma's story. The Foundation's headquarters occupied a converted veterinary clinic on South Lamar, featuring specialized spaces designed to accommodate both Emma's needs as a developing toddler and the requirements of conducting rigorous scientific research. The facility included observation rooms with one-way glass, video recording equipment for documenting interactions, medical facilities for examining animals, and comfortable spaces where Emma could rest between sessions. Dr. Foster maintained an office at the facility, coordinating the ongoing research while serving as Emma's primary developmental pediatrician. Emma's vocabulary had expanded significantly over the months, though her communication remained selective and purposeful rather than following typical patterns of childhood language development. She had developed a sophisticated ability to articulate observations about animal health and behavior, using medical terminology that surprised even experienced veterinarians. However, her general conversation skills remained limited, and she continued to show characteristics that suggested her neurological development followed unique pathways that didn't conform to standard developmental milestones. On a crisp October morning, Emma was scheduled to work with a group of therapy animals that visited pediatric patients at Dell Children's Medical Center. The session represented an expansion of her abilities into a new area, using her diagnostic skills to assess the health and emotional readiness of animals that provided comfort and support to hospitalized children. The implications were significant, as therapy animals needed to be in optimal physical and emotional condition to safely interact with medically vulnerable young patients. Rex had become Emma's most frequent animal partner, his full recovery from hip surgery having restored him to active duty with the Austin Police Department. However, the German Shepherd's relationship with Emma had evolved beyond their initial therapeutic connection into something that resembled a genuine friendship. Officer Chun had arranged his patrol schedule to include regular visits to the foundation, recognizing that Rex's interactions with Emma provided benefits that extended to his police work. The dog's stress levels had decreased measurably since beginning regular sessions with Emma, and his performance in high-pressure situations had actually improved. Dr. Amanda Foster's research on Emma's neurological development had produced findings that were reshaping scientific understanding of childhood empathy and sensory processing. Brain imaging studies conducted every 3 months showed continued evolution in Emma's neural connectivity, particularly in regions associated with emotional processing and sensory integration. The research suggested that Emma's abilities were not static gifts, but rather dynamic capabilities that continued to develop as her brain matured. Emma's neurological development represents something we've never documented before, Dr. Foster explained during a presentation to the American Academy of Pediatrics conference in Dallas. Her brain appears to be developing specialized pathways for processing and interpreting emotional and physical states in other living creatures. The implications for our understanding of human empathy and interspecies communication are profound. The Foundation's work had attracted collaboration requests from veterinary schools, children's hospitals, and research institutions from around the world. Dr. Patricia Hernandez had established an international network of researchers studying similar cases. Though Emma's combination of diagnostic accuracy and therapeutic communication remained unique in the documented literature, a foundation had also begun training programs for veterinarians and pediatric healthcare providers, teaching them to recognize and support children who might possess similar abilities. Emma's work with therapy animals had revealed another dimension of her abilities, the capacity to identify emotional readiness and stress levels that might affect an animal's suitability for patient interaction. During one particularly significant session, Emma had identified anxiety in a usually calm therapy dog named Bella, leading to the discovery that Bella's handler was experiencing personal stress that was affecting the dog's emotional state. Intervention prevented a potentially problematic therapy session and led to additional support for the handler, ultimately improving outcomes for both the dog and the patients she served. The most rewarding aspect of Emma's work, from Sarah's perspective, was witnessing her daughter's growing confidence and social development. The structured interactions with animals and the positive responses from veterinary staff and researchers had provided Emma with a sense of purpose and accomplishment that supported her overall emotional growth. She had begun engaging in simple play activities with other children, showing increased interest in typical toddler pursuits while maintaining her special connection with animals. Officer Chan's visits had become highlights of Emma's week, and the bond between Rex and Emma had evolved into something that benefited both partners. Rex had begun showing signs of anticipating their sessions, displaying excitement and focus that differed from his responses to other activities. During one memorable session, Rex had actually initiated contact with Emma, approaching her when she seemed tired and resting his head against her shoulder in a gesture of comfort that moved all the adult observers. The Foundation's collaboration with the Austin Police Department had expanded beyond Rex to include other canine units with Emma, providing insights into the physical and emotional well-being of police dogs that helped maintain the health of the entire program. Her ability to identify stress, minor injuries, and emotional issues before they became serious problems had proven invaluable for maintaining the effectiveness of the K9 program while ensuring the welfare of the working dogs. Dr. Michael Rodriguez from the Austin Animal Shelter had documented remarkable improvements in adoption rates for animals that had been assessed by Emma. Her insights into behavioral issues, health concerns, and emotional readiness had helped shelter staff better match animals with appropriate families, reducing return rates and improving outcomes for both pets and adopters. Animals that Emma identified as needing additional medical care or behavioral support received targeted interventions that significantly improved their adoption prospects. As Emma approached her third birthday, the question of her educational future had become increasingly important. Traditional preschool programs seemed inadequate for a child whose vocabulary included complex medical terminology, but who still struggled with basic social interactions. Dr. Foster and Sarah had begun developing an individualized education plan that would support Emma's continued development while nurturing her unique abilities. The Foundation had also begun working with families of other children who showed signs of unusual empathy or sensitivity to animals, providing resources and support for parents navigating similar challenges. While no other child had demonstrated abilities identical to Emma's, several families had found value in the Foundation's approach to supporting children with atypical neurological development. On a warm November afternoon, as Emma sat quietly with Rex in the Foundation's garden area, Sarah reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with the 2-year-old's first words on a downtown Austin sidewalk. Emma was gently stroking Rex's fur while speaking softly about his contentment and health, her words carrying the same healing quality that had characterized her interactions with animals from the beginning. "Doggy feels happy and strong," Emma said, her voice carrying a maturity that continued to amaze everyone who heard her speak. "Hip bone is all better now. Doggy likes helping people and likes visiting Emma. Doggy knows he is loved and important." Rex's tail wagged gently in response, and his eyes reflected the peaceful contentment that had become characteristic of his interactions with Emma. Officer Chun, observing from nearby, smiled at the sight of his partner in such obvious comfort and happiness. The toddler who had shocked everyone by diagnosing a police dog's hidden injury had indeed become a bridge between the human and animal worlds, proving that extraordinary communications could emerge from the most unexpected sources. Her journey from a nonverbal child with developmental delays to a young girl whose unique abilities were improving the lives of countless animals had demonstrated that differences in neurological development could represent gifts rather than deficits, provided they were nurtured with understanding, patience, and love. As the Foundation continued to grow and Emma's abilities continued to develop, the Martinez family looked toward a future filled with possibilities that extended far beyond anything they could have imagined on that transformative Tuesday morning when everything changed with a toddler's first words.